mid to late 2023, I think that's when the next move up can take place. This is now the beginning of the end of the drop. Yes, it's going to get uglier. Yes, it's going to get harder for a lot of investors, but I do think below 20,000 gets us very close to that bottom. So, I mean, we are holding the 19.5 2017 high. So if we look at the chart here, we can see that if we zoom all the way back to 2017, we briefly pierced it, which is very normal because there's a lot of stops that are put there by investors. There's this kind of mentality that people were buying just above 20,000. So for it to flush below, psychologically, a lot of them will jump out and get scared, and then price usually recovers. So in the very near term, I'm in the camp that we still have a little bit more upside to go. So I could see us bouncing back to 25.5 or so, maybe even 28. But I want to caveat that with saying that this is still a bear market. This is still an ice age, like you referred to it as. The charts are still pointing to overall further downside. You're right about a lot of the issues that are occurring. The Celsius news, the Terra Luna collapse, all of those are very much like the dot-com bubble bursting in 2000. And I think that's what crypto is going through right now. And if there's one thing I remember from that period, it was the very, very start of my career, is that it didn't end with just a few blow-ups, right? You have to see more. You have to get more downside there. You have to get to a point where investors are ready to totally throw their hands up in despair. And while a lot of investors are still, they're hurting, the average investor, I think, is in from $50,000, $60,000. They're not fully ready to give up just yet. And I know that sounds horrible, but that's how market bottoms are put in, and that is ultimately what I think is going on here. So I do have a target that remains right around 12,000. So I fine-tuned it a little bit. The 12,000 level gives us a measured move. So if you take a look here, and this is kind of just some cool technical analysis, if you take this move down right here, right? So from this high down, which was a straight shot, then you had this kind of consolidation pattern. And then if you take this high down here, the measured move, meaning this distance to this distance, that's the exact distance from here to where the bottom should be put in. In addition, Bitcoin during its winters, its past bear markets, corrects 80 to 85%. If you correct that in this period, you get 12,000-ish, give or take, as well. So there's a lot of confluence of levels at around 12,000 where my next target is.
Is it a downward? So you were saying we could move back up and then to just shoot back down?
Yeah, markets are very much like that. I mean, we saw that over here where you kind of went up, you start, and this is the key, right? So when we were below 20,000, you
Yeah.
saw so much bear market kind of sentiment, and the markets tend to wait and kind of lure people back in. So even in this mid area here, when we were back to these highs of 47, 48,000, I was hearing, oh, we're going right back to all-time highs. This is the big breakout. This is all that stuff. And the markets still need to kind of do that here, in my opinion, in which case they have to move up. You have to start getting that sentiment, that hope back. And the markets are evil like that. And not literally evil, but they like to get people to start to believe again, and then they crush their dreams. And that's just the way markets work. No, so this is where it gets even more intriguing with how kind of a pro trader or pro investor handles it. So as much as I am a believer that there's a decent chance of going to 12,000, maybe even lower, right? I don't know for sure. There's also a chance it doesn't get there. So what I have done here is I basically selected, and I said to myself, how much money am I willing to invest in Bitcoin in this bear market when it gets down to this area or below? I took that amount, let's just say $1 million, right? And I divide it into 6 categories, 6 even amounts. And when we were at 19,000, I took my first 1/6 and I bought Bitcoin there. And what I'm going to do is every $2,500 to $3,000 down, I'm going to buy another 1/6 position, eventually accumulating a full 6/6 position, right? And so the idea is
Yeah.
I've been around the block enough where I understand that sometimes downside targets don't fully get achieved and sometimes they overshoot. So I don't try to pick the exact bottom. Once we get near, I just start slowly dollar cost averaging in, knowing that my long-term view on Bitcoin is still extremely, extremely bullish. 65K will be a low target for when this thing takes off in the next cycle. This is the crazy thing about it. When you were at 65,000, what did we hear, right? We heard the influencers, the talking heads, everyone was, oh, it's going
Yeah,
100,000 by the end of
absolutely.
November 2021, then 250, then 500, and it was ridiculous in that side. And now you're starting to hear the opposite. Everyone's saying, oh, it's a scam, it's going to go to zero. Those are actually contrarian views that as an investor you need to separate from your own emotion. Meaning the more I hear that, the more I believe that we are getting closer to a bottom. And basically, it just comes back to common sense. Just use your logic, right? Logic is the most powerful thing in investing, but so many people get caught up in emotion
Mm-hmm.
instead to make their decisions. But if you think about how eventually we're going to slide back into a big recession, the Fed eventually is going to have to print more money. Central banks have already printed tons of money. There's a general need from a people's perspective all over the globe for this alternate to fiat currencies that cannot be printed willy-nilly. I mean, all of these factors make us need some sort of digital currency. Now you could say, well, gold could fill that role. I agree it does, but try, sending gold over countries, right? I mean, you can't pick up a bag of gold and just walk to the airplane and carry it easily. The key to crypto is how easily it can be transferred from country to country, how quickly, and how again it doesn't have that endless printing ability like fiat currency. So I'm in the camp that this is now the beginning of the end of the drop. Yes, it's going to get uglier. Yes, it's going to get harder for a lot of investors, but I do think below 20,000 gets us very close to that bottom, maybe around 12, maybe sub 12. But in the scheme of things, when you're talking about a move from 65,000 down, we're kind of at the tail end, right? We've already come down 40, 45, 50,000. Now we just have to do maybe another 10 or 5.
Okay.
Yeah, so time frame wise, I'm looking at, so in past cycles, and all we do as technical traders is look at past cycles. That's all we have to go by. It usually takes about 12 months for Bitcoin to bottom out. So that means that puts us kind of later this year, November-ish, for when a bottom could be in. And then there's usually a 6-month period of just ups and downs, kind of making bulls think they're going to win, then they get smoked, and then bears think it's going to go lower, and then they're wrong as well. So that choppy 6-month period. So what I would say is by late 2023, so unfortunately, you still have at least another year of this probably, mid to late 2023, I think that's when the next move up can take place. And I also coincide that with my macro view that by that period, inflation will have come down to 4 or 5%, but the economy will be really suffering. And it's likely the Fed will then turn on the spigots again and start stimulating to try to get unemployment, which at that point has probably spiked to 7 to 10%. They'll start to get that down by printing money and stimulating. So watch for the Fed to start to do that. I think that's going to be a key for when you finally see Bitcoin bottom and start to turn around. What I always love saying, and I think this really sinks into people, is when you say, okay, Bitcoin is a 13-year-old, right? So it started in 2009. Here we are in 2022. It's the equivalent of a 13-year-old. I mean, for those of us that have kids, my kids are younger, but I've certainly known many 13-year-olds. I was one at one point, believe it or not. We weren't exactly rational. We were very emotional. We had these wild emotional swings up and down. And that's what Bitcoin's doing right now. It's kind of a very young asset. People are still trying to trust it, which makes it very volatile. Versus gold, which has been around for thousands of years, and a big day on gold is like 2%, right? I mean, like, holy cow, gold moved 2% versus Bitcoin like 20%. And so you have to kind of put it in perspective and say, okay, we all want it to mature into this offsetting of inflation and everything like that, but you got to give it time. It probably needs many, 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 many more years before it fully kind of behaves more like that gold type play.